Part of the Daily Lab mission is to share with you some of the background about the realities of the world we live in. Because ultimately, you either have to deal with reality or reality is going to deal with you. The following is a summary of my second book, The Science of Liberty, American Reformation. No one has performed a serious examination of liberty since John Stuart Mill's in his On Liberty in 1859, and so it is a subject overdue for study. This will be the first episode, and while it doesn't impart a lot of the detailed knowledge found in the book, look upon it as a Cliff's Notes, a primer, if you will, to give you enough information to keep moving forward as America enters this new age of revolution. There are only two forms of government that exist in our world. One is when the government rules the people, like we have today in America. The other is when the people rule over their government. This is called a state of liberty. The former, then, is called everything else, be it socialism, communism, fascism, democracy, or in the vernacular of political science, a statist or tyrannical state. Our problem today is that we live in a cyclical world ruled by linear minds. This requires a statist or tyrannical state and is defined by a centralized operating model of power over both government and finance. Here's an illustration I used in The Science of Liberty of how laws are currently made in America. I devoted an earlier broadcast to this chart, and it won't hurt you to review it, but suffice to say, it is the antithesis of the operating model of government established in our Constitution. Alternatively, a state of liberty requires a decentralized daily operating model of both government and finance, and its manual is represented in the separation of powers and the Bill of Rights laid down in our United States Constitution. This is what our Constitution is. It is a daily operating model for a decentralized government that provides for the people to rule over their government. The problem in America is that our Bill of Rights and Constitution, specifically our personal freedoms and the powers of our Congress, which is the people's place in our government, have been eviscerated and its powers have been usurped unto the President, the Supreme Court, and the Federal Reserve Bank. This flow chart of how laws are made outlines the advent of the imperial presidency, a powerful post never intended by our Constitution. The court today writes many of our most important laws unconstitutionally. You may recall Roe v. Wade and Citizens United. The first made abortion legal, and the other formalized the sale of our elections to the highest bidder. Events have betrayed the Federal Reserve Bank, but we'll be dealing with that in liberty legislation. The consequence is the American people have been overthrown and dispossessed of the nation our forefathers fought to provide us, and our birthright has been stolen by sociopathic greed. Need proof? Take a look at these three charts in Chapter 1. The first shows income growth of the top 1% and the bottom 90% since 1920. Note how the 90% prosper up until Nixon shock in 1971, which began the financialization and cannibalization process which now plagues America. From there on out, the 90% stalled while the 1% took off, and it hasn't changed since. What has been the result? Well, take a look at these two charts also in Chapter 1. Labor participation, or total lack of jobs, has sent American employment reeling back to 1978, just when women were beginning to enter the labor force. Now look at the last chart. Over 100 million employable Americans are out of work. Do you wonder why America is stuck in 1% economic growth? What would happen if there were good jobs available for all? Now you can see how America can and should be able to produce 7 to 8% annual GDP growth in real wealth, but only if we throw off the yoke of our ruling elite and return to the governing and economic system found only within a state of liberty. Do you ever wonder why so many academics and politicians call our Constitution a living document that needs to change with the times? It's because, having destroyed it, they now want to keep it alive so that they can kill it. All the world is a cycle. Sun up, sun down, the seasons come, the seasons go, only to return in their time. No matter how hard our ruling linear minds try, they can no more change the cyclical nature of life than they can make straight a tempered steel spring. In fact, the only thing they create is scrap metal. That is why 32 civilizations have come and gone before our American empire, and it is now our turn because we have allowed the same people to make the same mistakes. But it is not too late. History defines a revolution as the bankruptcy of a government against the people. This is where America sits today and explains the political phenomena of Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. What we are witnessing today is the destruction of the social contract between the American people and their government. And it is within this primary election cycle, going into the general, that we have entered into this first stage of revolution. Stage 3 is when the shooting started. That is why the Science of Liberty was written, to give the American people the means by which to overthrow our current government and replace it with a state of liberty during the transition of Stage 2 so that we can make America great again before our government leads us into the destruction of violent revolution. Taking back America is not that hard to do, and it can be done. All we need to do is change the entire daily operating model of both government and finance that rules America today. Our remedy is to reinstall our U.S. Constitution and its manual for the decentralization of power back into the hands of the people. It might surprise you, but the world, our world, your daily world, will not seem that different from today. The people that are going to have to make the major adjustment will be Wall Street, the too big to fail banks, and Washington, D.C. But that's who we want to change anyway, isn't it? Let me introduce you to Liberty legislation, 4 bills currently before Congress that would eradicate the systemic failure of our current operating model of government and finance that is destroying America and force everything into the daily operating model of a state of liberty, handing over its decentralization of power into the quantitative hands of all the American people. Liberty legislation also requires one amendment to be processed through our constitutional process and not through a constitutional convention. This amendment is for term limits for all members of Congress. These 4 bills and one amendment must become the litmus test we must measure against all candidates for Congress who want our vote. We must apply it to all 533 members of Congress. Our goal is to elect a new Congress, if not in body, in mind. And if we force all aspiring members of Congress to pledge to support and pass these 4 bills and term limits and begin the required amending process, we will have restored America, her bounty, greatness, as well as our personal freedoms. We've been there before, America, and it works. It is exactly what made America great in the first place. And if you want to make America great again, this is the only way to do it. I hope Donald Trump is listening, because nobody else running is. House Bill 24, Senate Bill 209. It's the first one. Recently voted, Senate Bill 209 was voted down by the Senate, a vote in which Ted Cruz did not vote because it was against the interest of the people to which he has pledged his allegiance. The godless bankers at Goldman Sachs. House Bill 24, Senate Bill 209 calls for an audit of the Federal Reserve Home Rescue Program in 2010, a financing scheme that was raped, pillaged, and robbed by the too big to fail banksters with the blessing of the Federal Reserve Bank and Ben Bernanke. And really, it should be called the End the Fed Bill, because once the American people get a good look at how a small group of our wealthy ruling elite can skull screw America, the Federal Reserve Bank would cease to exist, and with it the fortunes and power of Wall Street banksters and our ruling elite would begin to evaporate. This is not to say a central bank is not necessary, because the power over money is a power of Congress, therefore a power of the people. In this respect, it is centralized, but by structuring its decentralization to the control of the people instead of a trap against the people, it becomes a tool of all the people. Chapter 8 in the Science of Liberty is dedicated to the orderly removal and replacement of the Federal Reserve Bank. In fact, that's the name of the chapter, and we'll review it in later episodes. But suffice to say, it replaces the Federal Reserve Bank with the American Reserve Bank, or ARB, And instead of being run by economists, which are covered in Chapter 4, it is run by accountants who concern themselves only with the solvency of all banks. So instead of America's monetary policy being decided by 7 members of the Fed's FOMC, all decisions are made by the quantitative actions of over 300 million Americans. It is based upon a classical gold standard instead of a valueless fiat currency. Now, every economist will howl that it can't be done because it doesn't work. Yet their system of smoke and mirrors is far worse yet, and in truth, banking history in America has proven beyond all doubt through the Suffolk Bank in New England from 1816 to 1860 that when a gold standard is combined with a central solvency bank run by accountants, all large-scale financial bankruptcies end and severe economic breakdowns become impossible, and the power over money creation is thrust into the quantitative action of all the people. The only key is that Congress must remain the majority shareholder of the new ARB central bank, per their duty given by Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5 of our United States Constitution, and in essence, the American people would own the central bank. As I mentioned, I'll share more on this subject in later broadcasts, but for now, let us return to liberty legislation. The 3 remaining bills before the Senate are unfortunately not before the House because they remain without a sponsor. They are known as Write the Laws Act. They are Senate Bill 1663, 1664, and 1665, and together with House Bill 24, Senate Bill 209, they turn inside out the daily operating model ruling America today with a system where the government rules over the people. Back to a system where the people rule over their government once again. Let's take a look. Senate Bill 1663 requires that all laws be proposed, discussed, debated, and then voted on in the public forum on the floor of both houses of Congress. Today, 90% of our laws are written by agencies to which Congress unconstitutionally gave its powers through the necessary, but it turns out not necessarily proper. Necessary and proper clause of the same Article 1, Section 8 quoted regarding Congress' power over money. It is in the final paragraph of Section 8 that provides for the necessary and proper assignments of the powers of Congress in order for Congress to perform its duty under our Constitution. Perform its duty is key because words must mean something. The problem is that this necessary and proper clause has been applied by an unconstitutional ruling of the Supreme Court, which selectively applied necessary, but not necessarily proper. Let me explain. In 1819, the Marshall Court heard the case McCulloch versus Maryland regarding the scope of powers assigned by Congress to the first U.S. bank as challenged by the state of Maryland to tax the first U.S. bank's creation of script, i.e. paper fiat money. It's an interesting case because in writing for the majority, Chief Justice John Marshall defined the term necessary 5 times within the context of the necessary and proper clause of Article 1, Section 8, yet never once does he define proper. And so in stretching the case of McCulloch, a teller at the first U.S. bank and straw man to file suit against the powers of the state, in this case of Maryland, Justice Marshall essentially discarded any meaning of the word proper and in doing so assigned the definition of necessary to entirely encompass the word properly, essentially removing it from the Constitution. Within the legal community, words must mean something, else all the laws mean nothing. And this is what John Marshall wrote in his ruling. It is legal nonsense. In McCulloch versus Maryland has been quoted for 2 centuries as the basis upon which an elected criminal class can steal the people's power and birthright from our Constitution. So where do we turn to for guidance as to the true definition of the word proper within the context of the powers of Congress within our Constitution? Well, faced with the abandonment of the court whose delinquency has become the means to usurp the people's power from our Congress, we must look elsewhere for insight and leadership, and if necessary, to impeach the entire court once we have established the truth and elected a new Congress. Common sense dictates and academic research requires an investigation into the written thoughts of the original framers of our Constitution, and specifically into their observations regarding the early operation of the Constitution they created. Remember, America in her new Constitution in 1789, being totally untried for a few thousand years, being called the Great Experiment. No one knew how it would work or even if it would work. That included the men who had created it. Logically, academic concerns lead us first to the man who not only coined the term United States of America, but then went on to win America's freedom and independence from England. In the process, he then not only turned down being its king, but came to not only preside over the Constitutional Convention, but also became its first president, having poured his heart and soul and part of his wife's fortune into creating the great experiment of America. If there is any man who was closest to the problems that arose in the daily operating model of this new governmental system, it has to be George Washington. First in war, first in peace, and first in the hearts of his countrymen. Fortunately, Washington does not fail us in his observations and warnings to the preservation of the state of liberty and our personal freedoms. In Washington's farewell address to the nation on September 19, 1796, Washington makes clear this warning. We can never allow a power of Congress to be usurped to any other public or private agency, because while every assignment of power may be for the best of reasons, these powers will always end up in the hands of cunning, ambitious, and unprincipled men. And this is the customary weapon by which free governments are destroyed. Sound familiar? It is important to note that the only assignment of power of Congress that Washington acquiesced to was the assignment of Article 1, Section 8, Paragraph 5 concerning the coining of money and its regulation of its value over to America's first experiment with the private central bank, the first U.S. bank. This led directly to the explosion of speculation and inflation that swept across not only America but the Atlantic, caused an enormous market bubble to explode in the first man-made depression to sweep America and the world. Washington never mentioned the first U.S. bank. He didn't have to. It was the only assignment, the powers of Congress he had been talked into by America's first neocon and first Federalist, Alexander Hamilton. But even then, Washington didn't stop there. He then elaborates upon what the daily operating model for the creation of laws is for this government. Washington is quite specific, declaring that all laws must be introduced, debated, compromised upon, and then voted upon, all within the wholesome public forum, i.e., the floor of both houses, as the people's place in government, their Congress. And so it is only proper that the creation of all laws remain within the Congress. It is no surprise that a high Federalist like Justice John Marshall would issue an incomplete and unconstitutional ruling for the benefit of America's second failed experiment with the second U.S. central bank, a ruling that has been used to justify every unconstitutional assignment of the people's power of the Congress ever since. So essentially what Senate Bill 1663 is saying and does is that it forces the writing of all laws back to Congress, and that is proper. And once that is properly done, now we can start applying a necessary and proper to the allocation of powers of Congress to be administrated to the executive branch, which is where laws are administrated. It does not allow for the executive branch to act as the legislature and write laws. That is the power of Congress. That is the power and place of the people. And that's what Senate Bill 1663 does. Let's go to Senate Bill 1664, which complements our goals for a state of liberty in America, and that it stipulates that there can only be one single item in a bill. This means that there are no more omnibus bills like the spending bill Congress passed on December 15, 2015, which is a travesty to justice and leads to the destruction of America. Interesting to note, the stipulation is one of the adjustments the Confederate States of America made to its new Constitution that married the original U.S. Constitution to the Confederate Constitution. Functionally, It would prevent laws like CISPA, the Cyber Security Act of 2015, from being law. CISPA, which couldn't even make it to the floor of either house in its most latent format, was passed by Congress in the omnibus spending bill in its most disgusting and objectionable format because it was tacked onto this omnibus spending bill. Without it, it would never even have seen the light of day on the floor of Congress. People don't want to believe it, but it's a fact, and the result is today Americans are the most spied upon people in recorded history. That includes Hitler's Nazi Germany and Stalin's Soviet Union. We have to break the chain, America, and a liberty legislation is the simple and easy way for everyone to understand it. And all it takes is for all Americans to vote with one voice. It requires 15 minutes, 2 times every 2 years to go vote. It's easy. A lot easier than spending hours trying to figure out how to make ends meet and raise a family and still have a life. Senate Bill 1665. You'll love this. In Senate Bill 1665, we have a mechanism that forces the enforcement of the 10th Amendment and supports the entire systemic change found in liberty legislation. SB 1665 stipulates that all laws, before they are voted upon in the public forum on the floor of each house, must be read out loud. Think of it. Now everyone will be able to read each bill before it is voted on. That holds not only for the members of Congress, but the general population as well. Because now Congress is going to be forced to do its job. And its job deals with everyday events on Americans, which is now dictated by the executive branch. This will bring the government into the daily lives of over 300 million Americans for scrutiny. This is how you get consent of the governed, which is the key component of the Declaration of Independence upon which our United States Constitution is entirely based. What will be the result? Well, let me share with you. There will be no more 1,250-page Obamacare bills that no one reads. That requires the next 20,000 pages to be written by Health and Human Services along with an army of medical lobbyists. And do you ever wonder how care costs can spiral so high so fast? Well, wonder no more. Let's take a look at America's tax code. It's now over 75,000 pages. The new one will be 100 pages, and the armies of accountants and lawyers dedicated to cutting the tax bills of the uber wealthy that can only afford them will be taking new jobs that actually have a chance to create real wealth in their work and thus contribute something to America. Remember we were talking about how do we get to 7 to 8% annual GDP growth in America? You put people to work, and not only put people to work, you put them to work doing things that create real wealth instead of shuffling papers. That's the total effect of liberty legislation and its systemic change of America's systemically failing system. Every problem in America you can think of, I call whack-a-mole, because you can't solve all these problems one at a time. Literally, you smack one down and you think you've solved it. When all you've done is kick another one up over there, smack that down, and the one you thought you put down previously comes back up. But this time it has company. You smack those down and 4 more will pop up. It's like going to Vegas. You're going to lose. The only way to win at whack-a-mole is to turn the table over, smash it to pieces, and burn it. And the only way to win in the end is to destroy the game. The same holds for all the problems we face as a nation. We have to solve them all together at the same time by destroying the entire illegal makeshift operating system of government inherent to this government that today rules over the American people. The final issue of liberty legislation is term limits, and this requires a constitutional amendment, a process that is started in Congress and either ratified or rejected by the states. We must use that constitutional process. I understand there is a group clamoring for a constitutional convention to accomplish this lofty goal of term limits. I have spoken with some of their representatives. I believe they are all sorely misled. Somehow, someone has convinced these souls that once a constitutional convention is called, that it can be restricted to dealing with a single item of term limits and that Congress cannot interfere or participate. That's absolutely crazy. And it is national suicide because it opens the door to all and everything. If you ever wanted to destroy our United States Constitution of America in one bold swipe, the Constitutional Convention is just the ticket. I can't explain what would happen or what would go wrong, but I can guarantee you that out of it, America will rapidly descend into the violence and blood that is associated with the third stage of a revolution. I can also guarantee you that no one will remain untouched, that everyone will be drawn into its vortice. Everyone. Everyone. No exceptions. Everyone. This concludes the first episode in the examination of the Science of Liberty American Reformation study into the future of America within a state of liberty. Naturally, there's a lot more to it, but liberty legislation is the first step that every American can take in lockstep with every other American. I'll broadcast further examinations of the state of liberty, the state of liberty's effect upon domestic policy, the role of economists and their illusions, banking, and liberty's effect upon foreign policy, which I call the peace of freedom. We'll also be investigating the fallacy and lie of the term personal liberty and how it was created during the French Revolution to rob all of America of liberty and instead sprout chains and the Europeanization of which our government is trying to throw down our throats here in America. And until one understands its illusionary tactic, you remain defenseless and open to the duality inherent in the statist tyrannical state, and the subjugation of our lives and all we hold dear to the corrupt linear minds that rule America and the world today. The truth is, if something can't go on forever, someday it ends. If you are interested in addressing not only the looming financial meltdown that is threatening America, but every other problem the system has caused, I ask you to click on www.electanewcongress.com and read Liberty legislation and its companion HM 535, the plan to elect a new Congress. This is the litmus test we must require of all candidates running for Congress who want our vote. We all stand fast to liberty legislation and use it to determine who we vote for and who we do not. We will elect a new Congress that restores America to be in a state of liberty where the people rule over their government. With liberty comes the bounty of all wealth for all Americans. It's our only answer. Thanks for listening. I'm your host, William W. Faywell. Would you like to help spread the word? Everything runs on money, and rather than just ask for donations, I think you should get something for your money. If you agree and would like to help, or if you just want to know what is happening to your world, click on www.scienceofliberty.us or reach it through Elect a New Congress and purchase either the Science of Liberty, American Reformation, a serious study into liberty, or purchase New American Revolution, Constitutional Overthrow of the United States Government, both providing a look at the history you were never taught in school. Better yet, buy them both. Part of your purchase price will go towards financing Elect a New Congress and Liberty Legislation's campaign to restore liberty to America. God bless. Surf's up, America.